Okay, good evening everyone. Got about 30 seconds till we get rolling. Just a quick reminder that you have any questions at any point. Might be best. Which one would be best? Probably the RGT chat might be the best one to put any questions, but of course always feel free to ask any questions through Zoom. Just unmute yourself and feel free to ask away. These sessions are intended to be as interactive as possible. But off we go then. So we've got the rubber banding effect on, so we should stick together pretty much on the course. So if you're interested, the course today it's called I call it the Estoy loop. So this is actually one of my favourite loops that I do. I do a lot of riding out in Portugal, and this is one of my favourite ones. So that's what we're up to today. It's got one big climb in it, up to the top of a hill called San Miguel. Not related to the beer, if anyone was wondering that. So that's where we're going up to the top of. There's one big climb, and this should hopefully last a little bit longer than last week's session, but we'll see. So I've got plenty of chat for this evening's session. Before we get into that, I'll just do a quick little introduction. So for anyone that is new to these sessions or is watching the live stream, wondering what the hell's going on, my name is Rich. I'm the founder and head coach of React Fitness. We're a triathlon and cycling coaching outfit, and before we came on you would have seen our advert to our training camp, which is taking place from the 30th of April to the 7th of May, which is based in Provence, staying at cycling B&B called Serre des Ormes, which is pretty great, and it looks like my RGT is just frozen, which is not ideal. Here we go. It's back now. That's good. It's been a while since I've had any technical issues, so obviously probably all going to come at once now. Anyway, yes, so we've got the training camp. You've seen the advert for. Head to the website for any more information on that. You also would have seen an advert for discount with our training kit partners, Sundried. So just have a quick look back at the stream if you want that code. That's right at the beginning of the session. I think that's 30% off kit, which is pretty sweet. Anyway, so that's enough of the plugging. So tonight's ride, super chilled, guys. So the idea behind these sessions is that we're just cruising along, take it nice and easy. Use this session as an opportunity to bank some zone 2 mileage, or you can use it and take some weight off your avatar and use it as a recovery ride. So just whatever you want out the ride, really. You can go hard if you want. The climb is a good one. It's one of my favourite training climbs when I'm out in Portugal. I think it takes normally about 10 minutes. So it's quite a meaty climb. So if you want to go full gas at that, by all means, go for it. But the idea behind these sessions is that they are meant to be interactive. There is plenty of opportunities to ask questions. So do not feel that there's any issues with interrupting me to ask questions. Please just go ahead. Probably the best thing to do is to use the RGT feed to ask any questions. I've got that up so you can ask any questions in there, or as I say, unmute yourself and just ask away. So tonight's topic that I'm going to be covering, I've got probably, I think, at least half an hour's worth of chat in me. If you notice any slight sort of monotoneness about my voice, I have just been doing a sprint session in my own training, so forgive me if I'm at the back of the group. I've got a pretty tight hamstring, I've got to admit. But yes, we got about half an hour's chat in me. So feel free to hit me with any questions. Really keen to make sure that we're covering sort of stuff that you guys want to know about. So tonight's chat, I'm going to be talking... Hi there. No, so this is a free ride. So you don't need to be in erg mode. Your trainer should be simulating the course, or you can turn the trainer resistance right down so it simulates a pan flat course, and then you just kind of manage your effort accordingly. That's what I'm doing, so that I can make sure that I'm working at the right level. But yeah, no erg mode, no structure to this session. You can go as hard or as easy as you like. If you're looking for a lot of structure, then head to our Wednesday evening session, which we've got an absolute belter of a session. This Wednesday we've got a speed endurance session, so that'll be a lot of fun. So yes, got a chat about relationship between heart rate and power zone. So I'll just get started with that. Okay. Oh, my RGT is not happy this evening, is it? Alright, I'll leave that. I'll leave RGT on top. Hopefully behaves itself a bit better. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do, which is always a great way to start any conversation, I wanted to start with a table, with a chart. All the best conversations start with a graph or a chart, don't they? So I'm just going to flip that onto the screen now. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that at least a little bit. Don't worry if you can't see the detail. This chart is available on our website. If you go to the training articles section, there should be a training zones chart on there. But basically, we had a great question in last week's session, which I didn't have time to cover in any sort of depth. And it gave me an idea for hopefully some good content for tonight's session. The question I was asked was if I could cover a little bit about how heart rate and power are linked. And so this training zones chart just gives you an idea of that. So you can kind of see how the power zones, we use 7 power zones, and you can just see how they're linked to roughly heart rate training zones as well. So I think probably the key thing to note, if you're looking to find out what your heart rate zones are, you're going to need to know either your threshold heart rate, which you can find out during a FTP test, or your max heart rate. So there's various different ways you can work out these training zones: threshold heart rate or max heart rate. We use threshold heart rate, but yeah, using that kind of number, you can then work out the zones in and around that. So this is roughly how it breaks down, and you'll see, of course, we've got rate of perceived exertion, which I've been going on a lot about recently, which is effort out of 10. So you can see how that, so you've got zone 4, which is where your threshold heart rate is, and it's also where your FTP is. Okay, so you can see those are generally around the same sort of percentage. So hopefully that's nice and straightforward. As I say, that chart is on our website, but it's the point I'm making really is that your power zones do correlate roughly to heart rate training zones as well. Just a quick one in terms of finding out what your threshold heart rate is. Well, it's a quick and easy way. Well, not a quick and easy way. It's definitely not easy. But the most straightforward way is through an FTP test, and simply just using your average heart rate for the 20-minute test. It might be, there are more kind of scientific methods or more accurate methods, but it's going to get you in the right ballpark. And as we've spoken about on previous occasions, heart rate fluctuates, due to a whole number of variables. So if you're in the right ballpark, you're going to cover most eventualities. So yeah, you can also do a full 1 hour test, which is kind of where you get your most accurate threshold heart rate from, and also the most accurate FTP from. But anyone that's done like a full hour TT, usually a 40-kilometer time trial, something like that, or even one of the races, I got a new 60-minute FTP from a race recently, and I tell you, you know, I don't think I've raced since actually. it kind of broke me. So yeah, that's how you get your threshold heart rate. For me personally, what I do is I just remember what my threshold heart rate is, which is around 156, and then I can just gauge how things are going in relation to how close I am to that threshold heart rate. So I know for me, easy riding is somewhere between 100 and 120 beats per minute. I actually can't show my heart rate this evening because my heart rate monitor is packed in. Some more moaning about that you'll be looking forward to, of course. And then I know like a tempo zone 3 effort, I'm probably thinking around 130. You know, that's without any real kind of reference to training zones. That's just kind of what I know from experience and from the workouts that I've been doing. So let's get rid of that chart. I think we have enough of charts. Okay, so that's kind of how you can correlate power to training zones. So last week we were talking about the importance of low intensity training, how important it is to do sessions like this where it's nice and easy zone 2 type work, and yeah, you're just banking that mileage where your body's going to be utilizing a greater proportion of fat for energy. The other thing I was going to talk about this evening was aerobic decoupling. I'll just take a little breather before I get into that. As I say, I trained not before this session, so I'm a bit knackered. But has anyone got any questions about heart rate or the training zones or any of that we kind of covered so far? Just going through the various methods of contact. Yeah, as I say, guys, it might be best to hit me on RGT every time I flick between screens. I think it's just overloading my computer a little bit. So when it does eventually come back on again, it's probably best to use the RGT chat. Is everyone happy so far? We're talking about heart rate training zones. Just generally on heart rate, it's a fantastic secondary metric. So by that I mean it's not one that we recommend training to as such. The reasons for that are, I've described previously, are there's so many different variables that feed into your heart rate. So one in particular for me is we're potentially working with a coffee company, and they sent me some cold brew samples today, so I have one of those. Oh my days. My heart rate was flying. I've been cutting down on the old caffeine recently, and yeah, it's helped me get through my session, I can tell you that. But yeah, so caffeine in particular is one that can really, it just raises your heart rate, your default heart rate. It's actually kind of one of the reasons why having a lot of caffeine can give you sort of a bit of anxiety, because your heart rate and your cortisol levels shoot up as a result of caffeine. So that's just a quick one to bear in mind. So moving on to our kind of next thing, which is aerobic decoupling. Just out of interest, is anyone familiar with aerobic decoupling or what it means? Is anyone willing to give me a little bit of a definition? It doesn't have to be exact, you don't have to use all the terminology, but just in the interest of hearing someone else speak, has anyone got any thoughts? I tell you, one of the things I'm going to do as we develop these live streams, etc., is I'm going to get a tumbleweed animation or something going every time I ask a question, and everyone just don't worry guys, I do totally get it. It's particularly if you know it's being live streamed, etc. So just FYI, for the guys on Zoom, with the live stream, your voices won't be picked up. So is someone gonna? Yeah, go on, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that final point, so I'll just repeat that for the live stream. Basically, the salient point from that was being made was that it's where your heart rate and power behave differently, and I think that's actually a really good succinct way of putting it. It's as the word decoupling sort of suggests, it's when your heart rate and your power sort of separate in terms of their relationship. So essentially, what we're doing with aerobic decoupling and the metric that we use to analyze it is we're analyzing your power to heart rate ratio and how well they stay linked together. Now, in terms of the power that we're using normalized power. So normalized power, guys, if you've not been to some of our recent sessions where we covered this, normalized power, or NP, as you'll see in sort of Training Peaks and other training software. Normalized power, all it is basically where it's an algorithm that strips away kind of the gradient, etc. And so it gives you like an average power that you can compare between rides. So say you did an hour's easy riding and an hour's smash fest, you'd be able to compare the normalized power of each, and you'd see that the normalized power of the smash fest should be considerably higher, which is what you expect. But another way you can use normalized power is it's actually between these sessions. So if we've got a 30k ride tonight and then probably another 30k rides next week, you can compare the normalized power between them, how hard you worked over different courses, and it basically kind of filters out a lot of the other information. So you basically just get a gauge of how hard you worked for the same for an equivalent course. Okay, so that's normalized power, and it's used so that you can compare it session to session rather than just using a normal average power, which obviously would change dramatically depending on whether you've got a hilly or a flat course. Hopefully that makes sense. Just coming back to what we're kind of talking about, aerobic decoupling, you're using a normalized power, so that kind of filtered power, average power number that you can use to compare session to session. That power, normalized power, the heart rate ratio, and how well they stay linked. So that's what we're looking at. Hopefully I haven't confused anyone too much by going into my little diatribe on normalized power. But to kind of put it into a nutshell, what we're looking at is whether as you maintain your power over a steady state effort over a considerable amount of time, whether your heart rate increases significantly or not. And so basically what it's saying is if your power stays consistent, but at some point your heart rate starts to drift and starts to go higher and higher, it suggests that you are perhaps lacking a bit of aerobic conditioning, a bit of aerobic fitness. And so basically the fitter you are, the more aerobic fitness you have, that power and heart rate should stay linked for longer. Okay, so it's a really interesting thing to look at. So if you're, I would suggest that there are kind of two contexts in which this is really useful to look at. Firstly, on your long endurance rides. So it will demonstrate if you're kind of pushing yourself to your limit in terms of distance, not necessarily kind of intensity. So you've got a big event and it's sort of like a 5-hour event. You as you build up to it, you sort of do 3 hours, 3.5, 4 hours, 5 hours, etc., building up to be able to do that distance. You'll be able to see how your heart rate and power kind of how they develop. And so hopefully as you're going through them, as you first start, there might be quite a big divergence as you get to kind of at the end of your range, but as you go up and up, that divergence should be kind of halted for longer, if that makes sense. So to put it another way, if you start at 3 hours in terms of easy riding and your heart rate starts to deviate towards the end of the 3 hours, as you get fitter and you get to 3.5, 4 hours, still at the 3 hour mark, your heart rate and power should stay linked, and that indicates that over that 3 hours you've gotten a lot fitter. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. It's not the easiest thing to put into words. It was easy when I was writing it, but now I'm saying it not so much. So to put it yet another way, if you're putting out a consistent power and your heart rate suddenly starts to rise, it indicates you lack a bit of aerobic endurance. Or conversely, if your heart rate actually begins to drop slightly, it shows that you've got really good endurance and that you can hold that power really efficiently, so much so that your heart rate can stabilize and actually drop a little bit. Okay? So that's the first context when you're kind of building your fitness, seeing how long you can keep those two linked together and comparing it week on week, and hopefully that decoupling takes longer and longer. The second instance is when you're doing steady state intervals. So a classic example would be the sort of benchmarking session that we recently did on our FTP Builder series. 3 times 10 minutes at threshold. And what you'll be able to do is compare each of the intervals and see kind of what the power to heart rate ratio is through each of those intervals. So if I give you an example, I did a session, was it last week, that explains, I think, how aerobic decoupling can tell you a story. So I did a similar, I wasn't 3 times 10 minutes, it was 5 times 5 minutes at threshold. I was out on my TT bike, and for the first interval I was spot on, heart rate and power exactly where I wanted them to be. Second and third, they were okay. As soon as I got to the fourth and fifth, all over the shop, heart rate completely separated, big kind of percentage increase in the heart rate. And so what that showed me is not actually that I lack aerobic fitness, because that's not my issue. I spend all bloody day on a bike. And the issue for me was actually I had accrued a lot of fatigue. And that's one thing that can really affect your ability to hold your heart rate steady. Is that I went into that session, and I knew it, it wasn't a problem. I knew I was going to that session pretty heavily fatigued, and that was demonstrated by how quickly my heart rate decoupled from my power. Because normally I should be able to do all 5 intervals pretty well, but in the fourth and fifth one, it diverged massively because I had just become overwhelmed by the accrued fatigue, and that was reflected by how the session went. I was dying in the fourth and fifth interval. So that's just another way that you can see it. You've got those two contexts: long steady state riding, increasing over weeks, months, whatever, seeing how long it takes for that decoupling to take place. The second one is comparing steady state intervals in structured workouts and seeing how many of them you can do before that starts to decouple, both of which kind of indicate the level of aerobic fitness that you have. Okay, so hopefully that all makes a little bit of sense. Let's have a little quick chat, check for questions. Hey, mate. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to go to, Training Peaks covers this. If you're interested in more kind of niche metrics like aerobic decoupling, then I would actually recommend getting Training Peaks Premium. So I can't remember off the top of my head whether you can see that metric with the free basic account. There is another piece of software called Golden Cheetah, which is, as I say, free. It's quite a lot less user friendly, but free is free. And you have to manually upload your data, which is the other downside. But both of those platforms will have a aerobic decoupling metric. So basically what you'll look for is just where it says power to heart rate ratio, and then it usually gives the metric as a percentage. And actually nicely brings me on to the next point I was going to make. So if that ratio, if that percentage remains low, it suggests that you've got good level of aerobic fitness. And maybe if it's consistently low, even during kind of those intervals that I was talking about earlier, it may even suggest that you're ready for an FTP test. So if we go back to that 3 times 10 minutes at FTP example, if your decoupling rate stays low for that, then yeah, that's always a really good indication that you're ready for an FTP test. We use that one as a benchmarking session all the time. So to give you another sort of helpful number you can use, if that decoupling percentage is less than 5%, then generally speaking, you're considered aerobically fit, depending on what kind of workout you're doing, of course. If you're doing like a sprints workout, you'd expect a lot of decoupling, and then it's not really that relevant of a metric. But yeah, so less than 5%, if you've got less than a 5% deviation on a long, steady state workout, so your base mileage at the weekend, then you're doing a good job, and you've got a good level of aerobic fitness. So just have a look at that next time you go out, do your long ride, or have a look after tonight's session actually. Go on to, if you use Training Peaks, or have a look on Golden Cheetah, and just look for that power to heart rate ratio and check the percentage. Hopefully if you're pacing it steadily, you will be below about 5%. So hopefully that answers your question, Sylvan. Is there anything else that the question is? Yeah, cool. Yeah. Yeah, so basically you're comparing kind of the first half of the interval and the second half of the interval. But if you're using, so Sylvan's question was about how, if within the context of an interval, you'd have a greater sort of decoupling effect at the beginning of the interval than when you kind of settle into it. And he's absolutely right. If you're using software like Training Peaks or Golden Cheetah, you can isolate the interval, and it will basically will do that for you. That's part of the algorithm that it uses. If you're particularly interested in it, there is an article on Training Peaks that goes into the algorithm that they use. It's a very simple one, but I wasn't intending on boring people with that. Plus, I actually can't remember the exact algorithm. But yeah, so you're absolutely right. You would have a bigger deviance in your heart rate to power ratio at the beginning of a hard interval. And we were just going back, so Sylvan also talked about Golden Cheetah and how it's not super user friendly. And this kind of goes to everyone really who is perhaps listening to this chat and maybe even feeling a little bit intimidated by all this sort of super geeky cycling chat. I think my message to you really is, don't stress about it, okay? Like I know when I first started coaching, and I still get it every now and then, one of my clients will kind of say something, and I'll be like, what the hell are they on about? And you know, often, you know, we call things by different names. So a good example is with Golden Cheetah, the phrase critical power is used, and that's basically the same as your FTP. But with all of these metrics, guys, don't get intimidated. They're actually a lot more simple than they might appear. I think a lot of the time it's about just learning the jargon, and you know, if you're not that interested, don't worry about it. You're not necessarily missing a huge amount. It's just if you're kind of interested in the minutiae that it might become interesting, and you can then bore someone at dinner, which I do more frequently than I should. But yes, don't worry about the kind of geekiness of this stuff, particularly with software. It takes time to get used to it. So I know with I use an advanced piece of software called WKO, which is by the same guys that make Training Peaks, and that is, yeah, it's really hard to kind of navigate to begin with, but over time, if you keep looking at stuff and looking at trends, eventually you get it. So just keep ticking over with these things, keep having a look at your numbers. They may not make any sense the first time you look at them, but with training, we're always looking at trends. So yeah, just keep having a look at your numbers, and hopefully over time, you'll start to see some patterns, particularly when it comes to aerobic decoupling, and hopefully it's a positive pattern. And you're seeing that ratio decrease when it comes to your long endurance training. So yes, a decoupling of less than 5%, and you're generally doing a very good job in terms of your aerobic fitness. But even if you can't bother to go into all the numbers, you can literally just look at the data chart that you get in sort of something like Training Peaks, and you can just see the lines diverging. Okay, and that's gonna give you a good sense of what's going on. Because if you're doing a long, low intensity ride, those lines should stay parallel to one another. Yeah, so I'm just answering Matt's question on RGT. Yeah, it's a long bloody hill, mate. I can't remember off the top of my head how long it is. I want to say like 5k or something like that. Something around that length. But yeah, it's a bit of a beast. Do remember, if you're finding that you're working pretty hard and you're not necessarily in the mood for that, you can always turn your trainer resistance down if you go into the sensors menu, and then on the right hand side there's a resistance tab, and you just turn that down, and basically it'll just take some of the gradient out of it. Okay. Oh man, my RGT is just not happy this evening. Not quite sure what's going on, why it's suddenly decided that it's not. Yeah, it is meant to be an easy ride, Matt. Use the resistance tab I was talking about. Might make it a little bit more of a calmer ride for you. So as I say, when it comes to aerobic decoupling, we want to see what happens, but we also want to make note of when it happens. So if we just say like our long endurance riding on a weekend is 3 hours, you know, and we do the same kind of volume over 10 weeks or what have you, what you really want to see, as I said earlier, is any kind of divergence take place later and later into that 3 hours. And so that's quite an important thing to have a look at. So when you next start, after your next long ride, doesn't have to be 3 hours, however long you do, just have a look at it afterwards. Just have a look at how that power line and that heart rate line, where they start to separate. Okay, because that will give you an idea of kind of, one, maybe you were going too hard. So have a look at all your power, your power levels that you are riding at. But or two, it might suggest that, you know, your aerobic fitness needs a little bit of addressing, and that might come not necessarily down to doing more miles, but just being more consistent in your completion of those miles. Okay, that's quite a point that people perhaps forget. It's not always about doing more. It might just be about being more consistent, so your body's getting more consistent training stimulus. So aerobic decoupling is this relatively complex training metric, but it can be super useful, because if you locate that kind of divergence point, you can then correlate it with your power duration curve, which is basically, again, if you're using Training Peaks or Golden Cheetah or WKO, you may be familiar with your power duration curve. It's basically a chart that we can use that will extrapolate, suck in all your data and extrapolate what sort of power you can put out over different durations. And so what you should see really is that the two kind of run in parallel. So again, going back to that 3 hour ride, if you've got your power duration curve saying that you can hold 200 watts at that time, you know, that should marry with kind of when that divergence, that split takes place. So you can see that it may, if you're doing like a 3.5 hour ride, riding at 200 watts, you know, that decoupling will start to happen at around 3 hours, because that 200 watts is what you can hold for 3 hours, but it might not be what you can hold for 3.5. That makes sense. So just finally, because I do fear that people are potentially starting to gloss over, just a couple of issues with aerobic decoupling as a metric. I mentioned one of them before, is that your heart rate is affected by a myriad of variables. Caffeine was the one I mentioned earlier, and I experienced today. Honestly, I was flying. Accrued fatigue, another big factor. I mentioned my TT splits last week, and that was because I was carrying way too much fatigue. Well, I knew what I was carrying in terms of fatigue, but I was carrying a lot of fatigue, and that affected the aerobic decoupling. Another thing I've also moaned about is having a proper heart rate monitor that works properly. So the wrist heart rate monitors, at the risk of being controversial, are generally pretty rubbish. Okay, a heart rate strap, which can also be pretty rubbish, like mine at the moment, which I think hopefully I've moved out of shot. Yeah, heart rate monitors, a heart rate strap is generally quite a bit more accurate. And so yeah, you need an accurate and a working heart rate monitor, which I think anybody who's worked with heart rate monitors know that can be quite rare. And it's mostly useful when it comes to steady state efforts. So when you're comparing intervals, generally you want those intervals to be steady state so you can compare them. If you've got lots of kind of like a really dynamic session, like one of our VO2 and threshold mashup type sessions, it's not necessarily that useful for those types of sessions, because it's really hard to isolate the kind of the key data. And then a couple of last points about the downsides of using aerobic decoupling as a metric. Dehydration and fueling can have a significant effect on your heart rate. Okay, we've talked about hydration and fueling in previous sessions, and no doubt we'll talk about it again. So if anybody wants to know more about that, please do always feel free to ask. I will answer you, but we probably will do sessions on that again. But they can have a significant effect on heart rate, in particular dehydration. I've talked before about what happens as you get dehydrated. Your blood plasma levels drop, your blood becomes more viscous, and so your heart has to work harder. It increases in terms of heart rate, and it increases in terms of kind of the effort used to pump blood around your body because it's thicker, more viscous. All right, so just remember that. If you want your data to be reliable, you got to be fueled and you got to be hydrated. And then just lastly, heat stress, which is, I guess, linked to dehydration, but not just entirely. Heat stress, training in a hot climate, that can see you both become dehydrated, but also your heart rate sit at a significantly higher level as your body works quite hard to dispel heat. So there you go, guys. Hopefully some of that was interesting. It's a hard topic to make sexy, but aerobic decoupling is definitely something to be aware of, and to start comparing your long steady state endurance rides or any kind of higher intensity but steady state interval sessions. As I say, when you first look at the data, won't mean much, but as you keep tracking it, having a look at it, then hopefully you'll start to see some sort of pattern, and hopefully a positive one. But do remember that it, as I've kind of intimated earlier, it can also demonstrate fatigue. So that 5 times 5 minutes, the threshold session I was talking about earlier, that, you know, the data was plain to see that I was either fatigued or unfit. I struggled to see that I was unfit, so fatigue it was, and that also kind of paired up with how I was feeling, so I was bloody knackered. So there you go, guys. As I say, I'm going to be on for another, I'm going to stay until the hour mark, so I'm here to answer any questions. I can go on talking forever. It's a gift, some of which might be interesting, but if anyone's got questions, I'm at your disposal, so please don't be afraid. There are no stupid questions. Otherwise, hopefully you're just enjoying a nice easy ride. Or not. And this is the case with this hill. So the question was about top tips for using Golden Cheetah. My advice would be to, if possible, carve out an hour or 2 hours of your day, and just go to town on it, work out how it all fits together. There are some good training articles out there, so I would have Google or other search engines are available open and just Google everything that you don't understand. So critical power, as I mentioned earlier, is pretty much the same as FTP, but it's worked out in a slightly different way. Yeah, I just take your time with it, really, and don't expect to be an expert, because I mean, I don't claim to be an expert. I'm not a super, I wouldn't have said that I'm a metrics or a data kind of guy. One of our other coaches, Matt, he's much more adept at this stuff, and I on occasion I have to admit I defer to him. He's an engineer by trade, so he's used to numbers and stuff and spreadsheets. I'm more of a talker, as you can tell. Yeah, I just take your time with it. Don't see it as something you're going to pick up over weeks or months, and try not to get frustrated if you don't understand it. It does fall into place eventually. But in terms of the main things to look at on Golden Cheetah, I would say probably one of the most useful things is that power duration curve I talked about earlier, which tracks your which tracks and predicts your critical powers over different distances. So just quickly on power duration curve, what it is it tells you by looking at all your data the type of power that you could hold over a particular duration. So particularly useful when it comes to time trialing. So if you've got a 20k time trial, it might take you half an hour, maybe a bit longer, whatever. And you're wondering, all right, how do I think I can hold? It's a really good way. You just go to that chart, it'll give you a rough idea, and then you can start to build a bit of a race plan around that. So that's probably one of the key things. And also when it comes to your low intensity riding, if you're not sure what power you should be able to hold for a ride distance that you've not done before, it will give you a good estimation. So that's another reason it's helpful. Another feature that something like Golden Cheetah is useful is for tracking your peak powers. So these are like your personal bests. The ones that we test in our performance testing sessions are kind of like the key metrics which I've talked about previously. You've got your 5 second, 20 second, 1 minute, 5 minute, and then 20-minute powers. Something like you can use Golden Cheetah or Training Peaks or WKO or various other pieces of software to track those personal bests. And so you can see over time kind of how you're improving, your anaerobic power is improving, your aerobic fitness in terms of your FTP is improving. You can track that much more easily over time using those pieces of software. And also by tracking those peak powers, you can tell kind of where you need to work. So if your FTP is proportionally much higher than, say, your 1 minute power, it will suggest that you perhaps got a good aerobic fitness, but in terms of your anaerobic capabilities, you might be a bit limited there, and so you have to do some more kind of higher intensity work. And of course, whether or not you care about that depends on your goals and if you're preparing for particular events. Apologies to anyone that's watching the live stream and you're seeing my RGT freeze all the time. Not quite sure why that's happening. Don't tend to have many issues, but there you go. Any other questions? Okay, right, so just relax, guys. Remember, you can ride this however you want. You've always got that training resistance that you can turn up or down. In terms of what these sessions are intended for, we're probably looking to ride at around about 65% of your FTP. So if you know your FTP and you've got your phone nearby, you can just work out what that is. But 65% of FTP is slap bang in the middle of your zone 2, your aerobic endurance training zone. And that's where, as we were talking about last week in terms of low intensity training, that's kind of where you want to, your lower intensity rides, that's kind of where you want to be really. All right. Just in Sylvan's message on RGT about the Polar H10. Oh mate, I've tried so many different heart rate monitors. They all, for a technology that's been around for, I think, close to 40 years, the fact that you can't get a heart rate monitor that lasts more than 6 months, I think is pretty shocking, particularly how much they cost these days. Used to be about 20 quid for a heart rate monitor, and now it's upwards of 60. I think the major problem they have with the design is the anodes and cathode, they get corroded by sweat, which just seems like a completely inherent flaw to me. Well, why you would allow them to kind of get corroded, you know, not be sealed. Yeah, really boggles my mind, that. Yeah, I think you could say that about a lot of forms of technology when in the cycling world. A lot of it hasn't moved on. They've repackaged it and dressed it up and charged an extra 300%. And but yeah, not actually improved the performance. I'll leave it there though before I start getting too stuck into it. But yeah, it's a constant source of frustration, the technology. As you see my RGT screen right now, who knows what's going on there. I think I'm about 10 Ks behind everyone else because it keeps freezing, but who cares? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So it's for the benefit of the stream, Sylvain was just giving the Polar, was it H10, a bit of a big up. So yeah, I'll have a look at that one. Because as I say, it's sort of real frustration for me at the moment. Okay. How was the Polar H10 in terms of connecting to training platforms? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Sylvain said AMP Plus apparently is very good. I think what I'm discovering at the moment is Bluetooth connectivity. As we gather more and more devices and try to switch between devices, that seems to be becoming more and more of an issue as each one sort of battles for dominance with each device. That seems to be a bit of an issue that I've been experiencing, at least, and I have to go through quite a repetitive process in order to link up my tech each time. Okay, so I'm going to stick around for another 7 minutes. So just a quick little recap of what we discussed, and then I'll field any more questions that people might have. So we have been talking about heart rate this evening. Fantastic secondary metric. Not the best primary metric because of all the variables that feed into your heart rate, and that's why power is such a great real-time metric. But you can separate your heart rate training zones out in the same way as power zones, starting with your threshold heart rate in what we call zone 4. To work out your threshold heart rate, generally easiest, sorry, I said easiest again, it's not easy. The most straightforward way is to use your average heart rate from your most recent FTP test. I probably wouldn't use your heart rate from a ramp test, by the way. You might be able to get your max heart rate from a ramp test, but I'm not sure about that, to be honest. In terms of max heart rate, I'd probably want to get that from a race. But the normal 20-minute FTP test or one of our performance testing sessions, you should be able to get a good idea of your threshold heart rate, and then you can kind of gauge how you're working in and around that. Or if you want to use golden cheetah like we talked about tonight, training peaks, WKO, to work out your training zones, your heart rate zones. And it's always a really good idea to know how your power zones and heart rate zones correlate roughly. Okay, I wouldn't worry too much about knowing the exact number, because your heart rate does vary from day to day according to kind of all the different variables we discussed. So just knowing roughly where it should be, you know, within about 5 watts or so. And then we talked about aerobic decoupling. Basically, in a nutshell, what it is when you hold a steady effort, and over time your aerobic fitness starts to burn out, and your power and heart rate start to separate. So maybe your power stays constant, but your heart rate starts to rise, or conversely, your heart rate might be steady if you're training to heart rate, but you can't hold the same power to maintain that heart rate. It can go either, you know, depends on which way around you're training. Best context for keeping track of your aerobic decoupling metrics are either long steady state endurance rides, so that you can compare them and see at what point it starts to, if at all, it may not, you might have fantastic aerobic fitness, but seeing at what point they start to diverge. The other context is on higher intensity but still steady state intervals, and you can see how they change, how you can compare your intervals and see how they stack up. So it might not just be aerobic fitness that's a factor, it can be fatigue and things like that as well. In terms of using that actual metric, you're probably looking to stay with under 5% deviation for good aerobic fitness. You're getting beyond that, you might need to either look at the balance of your training, or perhaps do more aerobic fitness. And the final things about the issues to do with aerobic decoupling as a metric, all the things that feed into your heart rate, accrued fatigue, making sure you have a proper heart rate monitor that works, most usefully with kind of steady state efforts, and then finally dehydration and fueling and heat stress can have a big effect. Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of what I was going to discuss this evening. Got a couple of minutes left, just in case anybody has got any questions. If not, no stress, just enjoy your final couple of minutes if you already finished or not. But thanks again very much for your company. Just a quick FYI, if you've got questions that you think about during the week, always feel free to ping us an email. If you want to know the answer urgently, we can respond to you via email. Otherwise, we'll cover stuff in next week's session. But please do feel free. You can email us or drop us a message on social media, whatever your preferred source of communication is. Short of calling me, please don't. I won't answer anyway, I never do. But there you go, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the course. I gave a lot of messages on the RGT about the brutal hill. It's worse in person, trust me, because the road surface is quite rough, and it's one of those kind of concrete roads where it's got like little gaps in places. Yeah, pretty rough road. So just be glad you're on a turbo trainer. But guys, hopefully you enjoyed that, and we'll be back same time next week, really. So there you go, just coming up to the last 35 seconds, and then I'm gonna bow out. But thanks very much for your company, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, look forward to hopefully seeing as many of you as possible on Wednesday evening session. We've got a speed endurance session this week. Our discovery series that's all about figuring out more about yourself as a rider, kind of where your strengths and weaknesses are, and how you might want to adjust your training. So most of the sessions are kind of gauged by how much or how little you want to do. So don't be intimidated if you see some mammoth sessions in there. It's not necessarily intended that you do all of it. It's about just kind of seeing where you're at. So there we go then, guys. Hopefully you all got something out of that, and I'll see you